This is the Importance of Instructional Design, Introduction to Instructional Design Overview, and Introduction to the 7 steps formal instructional design process that we will be using lecture recording. Way back in 1995, right after the internet went public, there were a group of us who were finding ourselves being internet traders. We were the people who had been using the internet before it went public in 1994, and most of us were teachers or librarians, and we formed a group called NetTrain just to exchange ideas and materials. We actually did a whole lot of work towards a certification, which sort of fell through, but it was a very interesting time. And way back then, I also wrote a book called The Internet Trainer's Guide. You can click through and get a citation for it. It's actually quite amusing to read now. It's sort of like reading about antique cars. I recommend, if you want a good laugh, to go and get it from your library and take a look, see how much has changed, or also see how much hasn't changed, since a lot of the Internet Trainer's Guide focused on this concept of learner-centered instructional design. But Carrie Straub, my colleague, said something very interesting back then. We were all talking about the technology and what pieces of the technology needed to be taught. How far did you go? Do you teach people to set up their own websites? What did we do? But she said something very profound, which has aged very well. She said the technology may be new, but the human beings using it still need our consideration in this area. Absolutely, the human beings are the core of the process. And then some other words which are relevant. And she said, there is just no substitute for solid instructional design if you want the outcomes you promise. And that is absolutely the theme of this course. Instructional design in general, you probably already do instructional design. Not necessarily formal instructional design, but every time you teach somebody or someone, you are thinking about how to teach. You're thinking about what you need to teach. You're probably doing it intuitively, or you are doing it off the top of your head, but you are doing instructional design. It really is an important thing to think about, that you've been doing this all along. Think about how it is that you decide to teach someone, even if you're asking a question at the reference desk or something like that. How are you teaching them? How are you approaching it? And if you don't think you are, how can you do it better? How can instructional design make your instinctive instructional design more effective? There are lots and lots of instructional design strategies available. The thing is, the most important ones, some of them are good, some of them are not really good. You're aware of many, as I know from reading your entry behavior and learner characteristics survey responses. The processes our outlines are different. There's specific details that they vary on, but the essential good instructional design process is learner-centered. The learners are the beginning. They are where you begin. Analyzing the content skills or combination of content and skills to be taught within the context of the specific learners. Where do you start? What's the next step? What's next? What do they have to know before they know or do this? And so on. Planning the instruction for specific learners. How are you going to deliver the instruction? And creating or otherwise preparing instructional materials, delivery mechanisms, supporting tools, and so on. And also evaluating the instruction, not just evaluating learner success, but whether the instruction itself succeeded, formative evaluation as we're going to call it. The thing is that there are a lot of instructional design processes, and they can be very complex, or it can be very simple. There are several versions of instructional design processes for different types of instruction, for teaching or educational goal or different learning domains, very specific to things like managerial or sales instruction, literacy skills, vocational craft skills. Formal instructional design is really analogous to how computer programmers work. If you've ever taken a programming course, you almost always begin with a flow chart. You begin with a flow chart to guide your coding. as you get more fluent with coding, you leave out the flowcharts, but not always. In fact, sometimes if you work for a company, or especially if you're a consultant, they want the flowcharts so they can see what it is you did. So, uh, um, the other thing is that real programmers in real organizations also have to document what they've done. So they use that flow chart, that step-by-step analysis of what they want to do and what's going to happen to advise the documentation where they explain what they've done, what's supposed to happen to their users, to their employers, to their clients, whoever. And that is what we are going to be doing. We're going to be using a formal instructional design process to go step by step, the flow through the instruction, and then finally, in the final learning activity, you will write it as documentation to share with other people, to share with the administrators, managers, co teachers, anybody that you're working on a team with to work on the instruction. So there is never, almost never, a time when you are working all by yourself, especially on the internet. You're almost always having to share with other people, and sometimes those other people are the learners. So we'll talk about with step 5 being able to explain to learners what it is that you're going to do, what they're going to learn, what you're going to teach is one of the key ways of motivating learners. I'm going to go back and then next. The 7 steps for effective online teaching and learning is my thing that I developed. I started teaching a course for the Cleveland area metropolitan library system way back in 1993. Yes, really. And I was teaching how to teach online, how to do online teaching. There were a lot of very interesting options back then. And it developed over the years. I finished in 1993, coincidentally, my instructional technologies master's degree at Kent State University. And what I did is I pulled together all of the instructional strategies, formal instructional design strategies that we covered in my courses, and pulled out what I thought would be most useful to the people in the Cleveland area metropolitan library systems. I tried to make it as simple as possible, but retaining all of the good information, all of the good pieces that would be useful for them. So it's a little more complex than some of the really simple instructional design strategies like the ADDIE model and so on. But you'll see a lot of similarity. And the real similarity, I'm going to look at the lecture notes before I come back to the steps. I'm not going to read through all of this, but you can. As I am recording this, I am finishing up writing my book, which is coincidentally titled 7 Steps to Effective Online Teaching. It is This is an explanation of the different instructional design tools that I looked at. Primarily, I looked at Principles of Instructional Design, 4th edition, Robert Gagne, Briggs, and Wager, and then I've updated the Principles of Instructional Design 2004. This is not something that ages badly. That 1992 book is just as useful today as it was back when it was my textbook, and I still own it. So this is what's really important. There's also some details in this overhead, this lecture notes overhead, that you may want to read through. This is almost exactly the text from my book, which might actually get published this year. Let's hope that by the time I have to re-record this, it will have been long published. The 7 steps begin with the idea we're definitely learner-centered, and the first step may be your last step. In subsequent lecture recordings, I will be taking you through step by step with more details on what each of these are and examples. That's one reason the lectures are taking longer, is because I'm using examples from my grant project and working on the grant project and writing the book all at the same time. So you guys, you particular learners listening to this for the first time, are in the middle of the perfect storm of instructional design brainstorming, I suppose. So it's kind of interesting to me to think about the ways in which all the things that I'm teaching are affected by this. And the first step, needs assessment and instructional goals. Needs assessment means, does this instruction need to happen? That means that you need to think about who your learners are in general. We aren't getting specific yet. You're thinking about, who am I supposed to be teaching? Grade schoolers. We'll go further than that later in step 3. Senior citizens, the general public. And instructional goals are why the instruction needs to happen. Does the instruction need to happen? And why does the instruction need to happen? That's what needs assessment and instructional goals are. Needs assessment also looks at existing materials. Sometimes you're going to discover you don't need to do the instruction because somebody else already did it, and you can use their work or give your students a book or access to a tutorial. This happened back in 2000, between 2001 and 2003. I was traveling around the state of Illinois to every single library, regional library organization because of a grant project called Library U. And I was going around the state and doing essentially instructional design for online teaching through the Library U program, which thrived and then became defunct when it got how do I say, obsolete, but it was a really marvelous project. And we started out with needs assessment and instructional goals. First thing is, too many people think instructional goals are the same thing as learning outcomes, or what we used to call learning objectives. They aren't. Instructional goals are, why does it need to happen? Well, that question needs to have the needs assessment information. At one location, at one of the library organizations, the director had decided that what they wanted to do with my training, and I did it pretty much the same as I'm teaching you. They had a project. We spent all day together. We spent a 8-hour day and then ate lunch and dinner together, working through the instructional design process for whatever it was they were designing for their part of Library U. And she had decided that they were going to do Microsoft Word instruction online. But we got to the needs assessment. And first of all, who needs this? Oh, our staff need it. Do they? Do your staff need this instruction? Let's ask. Well, it turns out most of them really didn't need instruction, but also, does somebody else already do this instruction? Why do I need to recreate it? Well, I showed her the fact that Microsoft had and still has extensive tutorials on Microsoft Word and Excel and PowerPoint and all their other tools, basics, online on their site. Now, these are not really extravagant tutorials, and they're not very original. They're actually pretty decent. They have been pretty decent for over a decade. But she started looking at those, and she's like, "We don't need to do this, do we?" I said, "Nope. It's you don't have a demand. The people you're thinking about teaching aren't really interested." And the fact is, if they are really interested, there's already instruction that exists that they can make use of. So the answer to step 1 may be no. No, that instruction is not going to happen. The instructional goals are, why does it need to happen? In the case of learning Microsoft Word, she thought the reason it needed to happen was because her staff needed to know how to use Microsoft Word to do their jobs. That was the instructional goal. It turned out that goal was not necessary because they already knew what they needed to know or thought they did. But the other idea about instructional goals is there are, let's use a really out there example. In your library, you have a program that you wanted to design a program to teach everybody how to read the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, or Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe. And the reason why is because you love the book. You love that story. You love the Hitchhiker's Guide. So that's your instructional goal. You love it and you want to share it. Now, the needs assessment is, are there people that want to learn that? Do they learn how to read that, learn how to approach it and analyze it, or write a reference about it? What is it that actually you're sharing? So that needs assessment with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I always forget if it's Galaxy or Universe. That'll be a brownie points for you to check that and let me know. That's also a way of my checking to see if you're actually listening to this recording. Just kidding, but it would be fun to see if you email me and remind me which one it is. I am actually, as I'm recording this lecture, looking up at it on my bookshelf, but I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see the title. But your instructional goal could be, you want to share it. That's why you want to do it. But you could also make it more, what's the word, acceptable in general by saying, because it is a key document that people should know about it because it's a key document in the history of the science fiction novel, and or you want to use it as an example of ways in which books get turned into media, or you could use it for analyzing. You want to teach it so because your users, your learners want to know how to analyze radio programming or something like that. And all of those are why it needs to happen, not what they're actually going to do, but why it needs to happen. Probably I beat that one to death for you. Too much. So I'll go through the rest of these a little faster. Remember, I'm going through these quickly now, but we'll be addressing each step in turn in the subsequent lectures. Step 2 is your instructional analysis, which is also sometimes called task analysis. It's more likely to be called task analysis when you're teaching skills like, sewing, if you're doing the maker space in your library, how to use the sewing machine, how to use the, what do they call it, where they form the plastic, or how to build a robot. All of those kinds of things are more tasks rather than concepts. But instructional analysis is the general idea. This is where you decide where do I start? What's the first thing I'm going to teach? What do I have to assume my learners already know? What's the first thing they need to know next? And outline that. You got to start somewhere. What happens next? What are you going to teach next? Turn it on, so on. The entry behavior and learner characteristics, step 3, steps 1, 2, and 3 all build on each other. They're iterative and reiterative. So entry behavior and learner characteristics, you're going to go back up to your needs assessment. If you've done a really thorough needs assessment at step 1, you may not need to do much for step 3, but you want to rewrite it. You want to make it more explicit. You're looking back at your needs assessment and your instructional goals, and you're looking at your instructional analysis. What do your learners need to know already? Who do they have to be? What kind of education do they have to have? What kind of prerequisites do they have before they can begin your instruction in order to complete and be successful with your instruction? So it's detailing that needs assessment, identification of learners with more specifics. Step 4, learning outcomes and motivating learners. In fact, motivating learners actually crosses over into step 5 a little bit too. But I really feel one of the reasons that learning outcomes are important is testing. You want to be able to do an evaluation of whether or not your learners have accomplished what you want the instruction to accomplish. That's not the instructional goal. The instructional goal is why it needs to happen. Keep that in mind. Learning outcomes are based on your instructional analysis. What exactly are you going to teach and they're going to learn, and how are the learners, are going to show, how are they going to demonstrate? What will they be able to do, know, be aware of, in order to show that they have learned what you were teaching? If you've done a good, thorough instructional analysis, your instructional analysis should map directly into your learning outcomes. This is what I taught. This is what they should be able to know after I taught. Motivating learners, if you can share with the learners the learning outcomes, what do they need? What can I learn from this? That's a major way of motivating learners. Now, steps 1 through 4 all go together, and our next topic is going to cover them all together. And there's a worksheet, learning activity 2, where you'll work through these steps for your project. And step 5 comes later, but that's pre-instructional activities. Before you actually do any instruction, you revisit steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, and start actually planning your instructional strategies. That begins with how are you going to present the information. That includes your tools, your includes your instructional analysis. How are you going, this is what you're going to teach, how are you going to teach it? Face to face, recorded lectures, experiential learning, a learning activity, discussion forums, discussion groups. Is it something that they're going to be able to sit down by a sewing machine? All of those things you need to decide in step 5. All too often, many other courses like this one start with the pre-instructional activities, but I honestly do not know how you could start doing planning instructional strategies if you haven't done a needs assessment, an instructional analysis, entry behavior, learner characteristics, and outlined your learning outcomes. So you really need all of these things. So steps 1 through 4 are all the build up to they accumulate in learning activity 5. This is where you're going to any learner participation. What will the learners be doing while you're teaching? And testing, assessment, and evaluation of performance objectives. Testing is not just taking a test. There's lots of ways of assessing and evaluating performance objectives. In fact, taking tests is probably the easiest. It's a good way of helping people review things, but it's not necessarily the best way of evaluating performance objectives or learning outcomes. I should make that more consistent. Performance objectives or learning objectives is the language that I learned, but learning outcomes is increasingly becoming the acceptable way of describing those. Follow through activities, including motivation and marketing. Follow through activities. How are you going to find out whether the instructional goals are met? If you say, using our Hitchhiker's Guide example, the follow through activities, did they read the book and were they able to write a good book report, a good book review? That's the follow through activities. So the learning outcomes would be related to the instructional goals in general, but they're the specifics underlying the instructional goals. The follow through activities might also be something as simple as they're doing their job better now that they've had this instruction, or they express greater confidence in doing their job. Motivation and marketing, you're planning for those things. What have I designed? What about it will motivate people to learn? And this is to engage in the instruction. So that's very, very important. Step 6 is planning for your instructional materials. We're not developing them yet. We're planning for them because I want people especially to be creative. You're not just going to make handouts. Not going to just do a PowerPoint. Well, maybe you are, but I want you to think about the other options. Think about what works, what doesn't work. So planning before you actually create. It'll save you a lot of time in the end. And planning for formative evaluation. How are you going to evaluate not what the learners learned, that was up in step 5, but whether or not the instruction did what it said it was going to do. And formative evaluation is also about improving the instruction. I do formative evaluation continuously. So that is the end of this lecture, and I'll talk to you again in a little bit.